Okay, so you want to find the center and radius of this equation, and so the equation is x minus 4 squared plus y plus 5 squared equals 6. And you you are asked to find the center and the radius. Well, it's easy in this case to find the center and the radius because this equation is written in what form? Standard form. So standard form remembers where you had x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. That was standard form of the equation of a circle. Standard form. And in this case, HK is called the center, and then R is the radius, the length of the radius. So in number one, the equation is already in standard form. So you could tell me right away what the center is. What's the center in this one? 4, negative 5. Now the radius, remember 6 is not a perfect square, so don't let that throw you off. So 6 is not the radius. What does the 6 represent in terms of that equation up there?
The square root.
R squared. That's what it represents, right? So this right here is this, R squared. So R squared equals 6. So how do you get R by itself? Square root. So you get the square root of 6. So that's your center and your radius. Okay? Now, let's suppose in number 2, we had this. We had x plus 3 squared plus y squared equal, let's say, 16. So we had a situation like that, where the y squared may throw some of you off, but remember y squared I can write as a binomial square. I can write y squared as what expression?
Y minus 0.
Y minus 0. Okay, so if you need to do that, then you do that. You write it as y minus 0 squared. You don't have to, but if you need to, you do that. So now you can tell me the center. What's the center? Negative 3, 0. What's the radius?
4.
The square root of 16, which is 4. All right, so that's what we talked about last time. We also, and I'm going to do it number 2, we also talked about domain and range. So if I were to graph this, if I were to graph that circle, I need to find the center first. What's the center? Negative 3, 0. Okay, that's the center. So I'm doing it by hand. It's not that bad doing this by hand. And then to graph the circle, I use the radius. What do you notice about the radius? It's how many units? 4. So I go 4 units to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. I go 4 units up, and we're doing that. You had that's supposed to be turned in today. 4 units to the left from the center. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 4 units down. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from there, you drew the best you can. Remember, we talked about making sure it looks like a circle. Do the best you can. All right, so that was a circle. And then from there, we talked about the domain and range. So remember, when finding domain and range as an interval, you always go from smallest to largest. It's got to be in that order. So domain, remember, is a set of x coordinates. So I start touching a graph when I get to what x coordinate? Let's see, that's negative 3, 4, 5. Is that 7? Negative 7, is that what y'all got? Yeah. So remember, it's a bracket though, right? Because that point is actually on the graph. So negative 7, comma, all the way to what x coordinate? 1. Smallest to largest. The range is a set of y coordinates. So there you go from bottom up along your y-axis. What is the y value in which I start touching this graph? Negative 4, okay. All the way to what y value? 1, 2, positive 4? All right. All right, so that was a quick review of what we did last time. Now the problem now is this. So if you look at that second page of that handout, number 5A, looks like this. You have x squared plus 4x plus y squared minus 10y equal negative 2. So go ahead and write that down. That's actually 5a over here on that second page. So x squared plus 4x plus y squared minus 10y equal negative 2. Now notice that the direction says to find it says determine the center and the radius of the circle. That's what it's asking you to do. There's no way you can look at this and determine the center and the radius like you did in 1 and 2. It was easy to determine the center and the radius in 1 and 2 because those equations of the circles were written in what form? Standard form. Well, number 5a is not standard form. That is not the standard form. It does not look anything, this right here, does not look anything like this. Now, also keep in mind, remember we're dealing with all different kinds of equations now. You had square root equations, you had absolute value equations, you had quadratic equations, you had linear equations, all different kinds of equations. You have to recognize that this is the equation of a circle. It's the equation of a circle for one of two things. X and y, the variable x and the variable y, you see that there are two terms that are being raised to what power? Second. You have an x squared and you have a y squared, and the coefficient of x squared and y squared are both 1s. Okay, so that's the equation of a circle. But it is not in standard form. This is called general form right here. So that's general form. General form. So general form is where you just have all those terms spread out like that. In order to determine the center and the radius, you've got to write it in standard form. Well, standard form, if you look at it, if you go back to standard form, you'll notice that the standard form involves a binomial square, doesn't it? In fact, how many are there? 2. There are 2 of them where you have a binomial squared. Well, if you remember what we did last class period, and even at the beginning of this class period, let's go back to number 1, where I went from here to a binomial squared. If I go from a polynomial that looks like this to a binomial squared, when I did this one, it involved what I did to get it to that binomial squared. What did I do to get that polynomial written as a binomial squared? What process was I doing in this example up there? Completing a square. Completing the square. So if I want to get this right here, this to look like this, I've got to complete the square. That's what I have to do. All right. So the process is not difficult. It's fairly easy because you already know how to complete the square. Let's do that. All right. So here's how you can complete a square for a circle, though. When we did the quadratic equation, there's only one variable. There was the variable y. Or the variable x, whatever it was. I think it was the variable x. Here, though, you have how many variables to deal with? 2. So you have to complete the square how many times? Twice. Come on, if you go back to this equation here, when I solved this quadratic equation, you only had how many variables? Just one variable x. And so I completed the square. I only did it once. I only did the process once. Here, I've got x's and I've got what? Y's. So I've got to complete the square twice. So you complete the square on the x's, and you complete the square on the y's. Now remember when I solved this quadratic equation, at some point, didn't I bring the constant to the other side? Mm-hmm. Okay? And I left all the variables on one side? Mm-hmm. Same thing here. But in this case, isn't the constant already on the other side? Yeah, so negative 2 is already on the other side. Now, you gotta complete the square on the variable x and complete the square on the variable y. What I would do at this point is I would group the x's together and then group the y's together. And remember when always go back to what we've been discussing, when I brought this constant to the other side, and even before I did all of this right here, I left some space. Remember that space? Okay, so listen carefully now. You're going to group the x's together, leave some space. So I'm going to say x squared plus 4x, leave some space. Then I'm going to group the y's together, leave some space. Group the y's together, leave some space. So plus y squared minus 10y, space. And that's going to equal what number? Negative 2. Right. Just like we've done before, it's nothing new. It's just like you have two variables now to deal with. So you group the x's together, group the y's together. So now at this point, just so you don't get all this other stuff intertwined, I would just go ahead and cover the y's first and then complete the square on the x's. So let's complete the square now. So let's start by completing the square again. I brought the constant to the other side. X squared has a coefficient of 1. So let's do the next step. Next step is to state the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? 4. What do I do to it? Divided by 2 and take half of it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that on this side. What do I get when I divide that by 2? 2. What do I do to that number 2, though? Square it. What do I get? 4. Nothing new. Stuff you've had already. What do I do to that 4? Add it to both sides. I'll put 4 in that blank. I'll put it as a plus 4, though. Plus 4. And also do the same thing to the other side, because what you do to one side of an equation, you do to the other. So I'll do plus 4 here. So that trinomial x squared plus 4x plus 4, if I did this correctly, remember this should now be a binomial squared. Is it? Yes. What is it? X plus 2 squared. The 2 y's now. Let's complete the square in the y's. So I'm going to cover this part up, and let's talk about the y's. I take the coefficient of y. What's the coefficient of y? Negative 10. Negative 10. I'm going to put that on this side. Divide by 2. What do I get? Okay, what do I do to that negative 5 now? What do I get? 25. Right? Negative 5 is 25. Remember, when you square it, better always be positive. Right. Then you add that to both sides, just like you did with quadratic equations. So I add 25 to both sides. What I do to one side, I do to the other. If I'm doing this correctly, this trinomial should be a perfect square trinomial. So what binomial is this? That's a y. Y minus 5 squared. And don't forget to put a plus sign in the middle. And go ahead and combine those three constants. And negative 2 plus 4 plus 25. What's that?
26.
26? 27? 27, right?
Yeah.
All right, so that's where we're at. So now, is it in standard form? Yes, it's now in standard form. It is in standard form. There's your answer in standard form. So you just have to complete the square, the same thing you did with solving quadratic equations, except this time you have to do it twice. With the x's, with the y's. And now you can tell me the center. What's the center? Negative 2, 5. And you can tell me the length of the radius, the square root of what? 27. And I don't think I asked you to simplify that, but let's suppose, because you remember on the worksheet today you had to simplify the square root if you could. So let's kind of review that. What perfect square goes into 27?
9.
9. And always use the largest. Use the largest. So that's the square root of 9 times square root of 3, right? So simplified, what's the answer? 3 square root of 3. So the main part of this, though, was just doing the square how many times? Twice. All right, so let's do another one. The second time's going to be the easier one because you already you reviewed this one. It's the same thing we've been doing, so it's not that difficult. All right. It just requires, though, that you remember how to complete the square and quadratic equations. Okay, let's look at B. So B is, so that's x squared. So x squared plus y squared minus 6x minus 8y plus 1. And I'm going to go ahead and, well, leave it as plus, equal 4. All right, so that's where I'm at. So that's B. So x squared plus y squared minus 6x minus 8y plus 1 equals 4. What kind of equation is this?
General?
Yeah, but are you a bit more specific?
Oh, quadratic?
If you were to graph it, it would be what kind of
Quadratic.
graph? No, it's not quadratic. It's what kind of equation, guys? Circle.
Oh.
It's a circle. You have an x squared and a y squared. That's a circle. So if you were to graph it, it would be a circle. It wouldn't be a parabola. It would be a circle. Okay, now, is this circle, can you tell me, for this circle right here, can you tell me what the center and the radius is right away? No. No, you cannot. You cannot tell me what it is. So you got to rewrite this in what form, though? Standard form. So standard form is where you end up with a binomial square. So that involves completing the square. So to get that binomial squared, you got to complete the square. All right, so let's do that. If I'm going to complete the square, I got to put the x's together, put the y's together, and all the constants on the other side. Okay? So we got to rearrange some things here. So I'm going to have x squared. What do I put next to x squared? Very good. Minus 6x. Leave some space, right? Okay, what do I write next? Yeah, we got to say plus y squared, though. Plus y squared minus 8y. Leave some space and say equal 4. What else? Not plus 1. Minus 1. See how you can easily mess up? So you got to be careful at each little step before you go in and say, is adding 1 correct or is subtracting 1 correct? Okay, now we complete the square. So let's do the x's first. Okay, so I take the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? Not 6. Negative 6. What do I do to it? Divide by 2. What do I get when I divide by 2? Negative 3. Now, what do I do to that negative 3, though? Got to square it. And what do I get when I square it? And what do you do to that 9? Add it to both sides. Add it to both sides. So you say plus 9, plus 9. If I'm doing this correctly, this trinomial should now be a binomial squared. And it is. What is it? X minus 3 squared. Not difficult. Just remembering how to complete the square on the quadratic equation. That's all you're doing. Now let's do the y's. What's the coefficient of y? Negative 8. What do I do to it? Divide by 2. What do I get? What do I do with that negative 4? What do I get? And what do I then do with 16? Add it to both sides. Plus 16, plus 16. If I'm doing this correctly, this trinomial right here should now be a perfect square, and it is. Y minus 4 squared. But don't forget to put the symbol here. What operation is this? Plus. Equal, and then take your calculator. You don't really need a calculator with that part. 28? Okay, so there's the equation of a circle in standard form. So that's standard form now. So you can tell me the center. What's the center? 3, 4. The radius is the square root of 28, which when simplified, so the largest perfect square that goes into 28 is 4. So square root 4 times square root of 7. So that's 2 square root of 7. That's your radius. Okay? Let's quickly do one more. One more. Look at C. So C is this. You have x squared minus 6x plus y squared plus 10 equals 0. Now don't let C throw you off. Think about everything we've talked about today and when we did circles last week and when we talked about quadratic equations. Okay, what's the first step?
Move the 10.
Bring the 10 to the other side. And then I'm going to put all the x's together, leave some space, put all the y's together, leave some space, right? Okay. So doing all that at once, tell me what to write.
X squared minus 6x
With some space, and then what?
plus y squared.
That should throw you off at that point. Because you're like, well, I don't see a y term. I see a y squared. I don't see a y. Well, that's okay. Leave some space if you need to. What does that equal? Negative 10. So, no big deal. That's what you probably would have written. So y squared will throw you off, but some of you may remember something we had a discussion about earlier in last week. Let's do the x's. Let's complete the square and the x. Remember the whole idea is to get a binomial squared, right?
Right.
So x minus h squared and then a y minus k squared. Okay? Well, let's look at the x. Is there any way, right now, you can write this as a binomial squared, this right here?
Yeah.
No, you cannot, because it's a binomial. You would have to take out an x to factor it, which is not what you want. So you need another term, right? You need a trinomial. So that's where you complete the square. So take the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? Negative 6. Divide by 2. Very good. Negative 3. Squared, you get 9. What do I do at 9? Add it to both sides. Now this is a binomial squared. X what?
3.
Minus 3. Okay, don't let the y squared throw you off, because remember the whole idea is to get y minus k squared. Well, y squared means the same thing as what?
Y minus 0.
Y minus 0. We had that earlier today. So you don't complete the square of the y's because y squared, I can already write as y minus 0 squared. And then what's negative 10 plus 9? Yeah, I messed that up. I'll tell you why I messed that up. No. It's okay. I'll just do one more thing and I'll tell you what to do. Okay, so if I did not mess this up, and you, some of you may see right away why I messed this up, but if I did mess this up, what's the center?
The center is
3, 0. Very good. Center is 3, 0.
imaginary.
Yeah, good. I'm glad y'all saw that. So the radius, this is not even a circle because the radius is a sort of a negative number. That's not a real number. So what I need you to do is change that plus 10 to minus 10. Just do this here. And I'm glad I brought that up anyway, because it's a good discussion. So change that to minus 10. This becomes what right here?
19.
19? So it'll be 19. All right. So what's the radius now? Square root of 19. And you cannot simplify square root of 19. So the only thing you got to remember about that one was that y squared was the only y term. So it wasn't an extra y term. But you just got to remember that y squared means y minus 0. Okay, so let me give you that worksheet on this. And then we'll be done. Here, hold on.